As a joke, the millionaire said, "My time cost $100. The poor girl paid, and what he did next changed everything." Robert Kincaid drummed his manicured fingers against the polished mahogany of the conference table, his steel-grey eyes scanning the quarterly projections displayed on the wall. Kincaid Tower's top-floor boardroom offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline, but he hadn't spared it a glance all morning. At 43, Robert had built Kincaid Investments from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, and today's meeting would determine if they acquired their largest competitor yet. "As you can see, gentlemen," he continued, his voice commanding the attention of the 12 executives present, "this acquisition positions us to dominate the entire Eastern Seaboard market by third quarter." His custom-tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. This deal had consumed him for months. Thomas Whitfield, his silver-haired CFO and oldest friend, nodded appreciatively. The board members exchanged impressed glances. The double doors at the far end of the room remained firmly closed, guarded by Robert's executive assistant, Diane, who had strict instructions. No interruptions, no exceptions. Which is why every head turned in surprise when those doors suddenly burst open. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Kincaid," Diane called, hurrying after a tiny figure who had somehow slipped past her. Robert froze mid-sentence as a small girl, no more than 5 years old, marched determinedly toward the conference table. Her worn denim overalls and scuffed sneakers stood in stark contrast to the room's opulence. Her auburn hair was tied in slightly lopsided pigtails, and her face was set with a determination that stopped Robert's rebuke before it formed. "Young lady," he began instead, his tone softening despite himself, "this is a private meeting. How did you get up here?" The little girl ignored the question. She stood directly across from him, her chin barely reaching the table's edge. Her bright green eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. "How much do you make per hour?" she asked, her voice clear and unwavering. A stunned silence fell over the room. Thomas coughed uncomfortably. One of the junior executives failed to suppress a startled laugh. "Excuse me," Robert asked, certain he'd misheard. "How much money do you make in 1 hour?" the girl repeated, more insistent now. Something about her steadfast gaze made Robert play along. "Well, that's complicated," he replied, his lips quirking into an amused smile. "But let's say $100. The amount was absurdly low. He made thousands per hour, but it seemed an appropriate fiction for a child. The girl's face lit up. She reached into her overall pocket and pulled out a small, worn Hello Kitty wallet. With painstaking care, she removed a crumpled $10 bill and placed it on the table. "I've been saving this for 3 months, she explained, pushing the money toward him. "And Mrs. Jenkins next door gave me $90 for helping in her garden all spring." She placed a neat stack of bills beside her 10. "That's $100. I'd like to buy an hour of your time, please." Robert stared at the money, then back at the girl's earnest face, bewildered amusement giving way to curiosity. "And why would you want to do that, young lady?" Her next words hit him like a physical blow. "Because you're my daddy," she said simply, her voice echoing in the suddenly airless room. "And it's Father's Day." Robert's world tilted on its axis. The boardroom, the executives, the acquisition, everything receded into a distant blur. There was only this small girl with her impossible claim and the money she'd saved to buy what most children took for granted. An hour with their father. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Emily," she replied. "Emily Wilson. My mommy is Sarah Wilson. She used to work for you before I was born." Sarah Wilson. The name crashed through Robert's memory like a wrecking ball. 5, almost 6 years ago. His executive assistant before Diane. The woman who had left so suddenly without explanation. "Mr. Kincaid?" Thomas's concerned voice seemed to come from miles away. "Should we reschedule?" Robert couldn't tear his eyes from Emily's face, from the shape of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, features he saw in his own mirror every morning. "Fine, Sarah Wilson," he managed to say as security finally arrived at the doorway. Now. Emily never broke eye contact, even as the adults around them scrambled in confusion. "So," she asked, pushing the money closer, "do we have a deal?" Robert sat alone in his office, the boardroom now empty except for Emily, who was carefully examining the collection of deal trophies on his bookshelf. He'd dismissed the executives with a terse explanation about a family emergency, words that felt foreign on his tongue. Thomas had given him a concerned look before closing the door, leaving Robert to face the impossible situation before him. "You look like the man in Mommy's picture," Emily observed, pointing to his face with a small finger. "She keeps it in her special box." Robert swallowed hard. "Emily, where is your mother now? How did you get here?" The little girl turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Mommy's at the hospital. Mrs. Jenkins was supposed to watch me, but she fell asleep." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "I found your building in Mommy's papers. The bus driver helped me because I said I was meeting my daddy." A cold knot formed in Robert's stomach. "The hospital? What's wrong with your mother?" "She's sick a lot," Emily said with the matter-of-fact acceptance children sometimes have about terrible things. "The doctors are trying to make her better today." Robert reached for his phone, but Diane was already at the door. "Mr. Kincaid, I found Sarah Wilson. She's at Massachusetts General Oncology Department. She's been trying to reach Emily. Apparently the neighbor who was watching her had a medical emergency herself." Diane's voice softened. "The hospital says Ms. Wilson is in critical condition." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Oncology, critical condition. The controlled, compartmentalized world he'd built was crumbling around him with each revelation. "Have my car brought around," he ordered, his voice rougher than intended. Emily was watching him with those piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Are you going to see Mommy? Can I come too?" She held up the stack of bills. "I still have our deal. 1 hour." Robert looked at the money, the child's. Life savings and whatever she'd earned working in gardens, and felt something crack inside him. He walked over and knelt to her level, gently pushing the money back toward her. "Keep it," he said quietly. "And yes, we're going to see your mother." In the elevator down to the parking garage, Emily slipped her small hand into his. The gesture, simple and trusting, sent a jolt through him more powerful than any business deal ever had. "Mommy says you're very busy," she said. "That's why you never visited." Robert looked down at her, this child who bore his features and called him Daddy, and felt the weight of 5 years of absence crushing down on him. Sarah had never told him. But had he given her reason to believe he would have cared? As his driver opened the car door, Robert felt the distinct sensation that his carefully constructed life was about to change irrevocably. What he didn't expect was the silver-haired man waiting beside his car, expression grim. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" His CFO and oldest friend held up a folder. "There's something you need to know before you see Sarah Wilson, something I should have told you 5 years ago." Emily climbed into the car, unaware of the tension between the two men. "What are you talking about?" Robert demanded. Thomas glanced at Emily, then back to Robert. "I knew about your daughter," he said quietly. "Sarah told me before she left, and I convinced her not to tell you." The interior of Robert's Bentley felt suffocating as Thomas's confession hung in the air. Emily had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted from her adventure, leaving the two men to speak in hushed, tense tones. "You had just closed the Westridge deal," Thomas explained, his normally confident voice subdued. "You told me yourself that nothing could interfere with the company's trajectory. When Sarah came to me, said she was pregnant." He trailed off, looking out the window at the passing Boston streets. "So you took it upon yourself to handle the situation?" Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. "To decide what I should or shouldn't know about my own child?" Thomas turned back, his expression hardened. "You forget what you were like then, Robert. The women, the 70-hour weeks. You made it abundantly clear that nothing would stand between you and building Kincaid Investments. Nothing." The accusation stung because Robert recognized its truth. He glanced at Emily, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. Her face, his face, relaxed in innocent slumber. "Sarah refused any money initially," Thomas continued. "Said she'd rather struggle than explain to her child that their father had paid to keep them away. I finally convinced her to accept a settlement if she left the company quietly. Robert's hands clenched into fists. "You paid her off with company money?" "I paid her with my own," Thomas corrected sharply, "and I've been helping them financially ever since. At least until Sarah found out about her illness and became too proud to accept more help." The revelation crashed over Robert like ice water. Thomas, his right-hand man, his most trusted advisor, had been living a double life for years, supporting the child Robert never knew existed. "How long has Sarah been sick?" he managed to ask. "The cancer diagnosis came 8 months ago. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. She's been fighting, but—" Thomas's voice broke slightly. "The treatments aren't working anymore." Robert stared at his sleeping daughter, trying to process that. In the space of an hour, he discovered he was a father to a 5-year-old whose mother was dying. A mother he'd once known intimately, but had forgotten easily when she disappeared from his life. Why did Emily come find me today? Why now? Thomas handed him the folder he'd been holding. "Sarah's most recent will and testament. She's named you. Has Emily's guardian should anything happen to her." The car pulled up to Massachusetts General Hospital, the imposing building looming above them like a harbinger. "I never asked her if the child was mine," Robert realized aloud, the weight of his indifference 5 years ago crushing him now. "You didn't have to," Thomas replied. "The timing made it impossible to be anyone else's. And look at her, Robert. She's yours in every way." As if sensing they were discussing her, Emily stirred and opened her eyes. Those familiar green eyes, his, mother's eyes now inherited by his daughter. "Are we going to see Mommy now?" she asked sleepily. Robert nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, Emily once again took his hand, a gesture of trust he'd done nothing to earn. "Mr. Kincaid," the receptionist greeted him with surprise, recognizing one of the hospital's major donors. "How can I help?" "You? We're here to see Sarah Wilson," Robert replied. The receptionist's expression shifted subtly. "Let me call the oncology floor," she said, reaching for her phone. While they waited, Emily tugged on Robert's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, the word still strange and miraculous to his ears. "If you're too busy, you can leave after our hour is up." "I understand." That simple statement, delivered with a child's earnest acceptance of an adult world that had failed her, pierced Robert more deeply than any business rival ever could. When the elevator doors opened on the oncology floor, a doctor was waiting for them. "Mr. Kincaid, I'm Dr. Lawson. We've been trying to reach Emily's emergency contact all morning." His expression was grave. "I'm afraid Ms. Wilson's condition has deteriorated significantly overnight. You should prepare yourself." And the child. The oncology ward smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. Robert had visited the hospital wing many times as a donor, cutting ribbons and posing for photos, but he'd never truly seen it until now, walking these halls not as a benefactor, but as a man about to confront his past and, perhaps, his future. "Doctor," Lawson spoke in hushed tones as they approached Sarah's room, "Ms. Wilson has been asking for Emily, and for you, though she didn't expect you'd actually come." "How much time does she have?" Robert asked, the businesslike question at odds with the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Hours, maybe less," Dr. Lawson replied. "The cancer has spread to her brain. We're keeping her comfortable, but—" He glanced at Emily, who was walking slightly ahead with a nurse who'd offered to show her the artwork made by other children. "She's been holding on. Through sheer will, I think. Waiting." Robert nodded, unable to form words. He'd prepared for every business contingency, had backup plans for his backup plans, but nothing had prepared him for this. When they reached the room, the nurse gently brought Emily back to Robert's side. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? Mommy is very tired and has lots of tubes to help her, but she's so happy you're here." Emily nodded solemnly. "Can I show her my drawings?" "Of course you can," the nurse said kindly, helping her retrieve a folded paper from her overall pocket. Robert hesitated at the threshold. Through the door's window, he could see Sarah, or what cancer had left of her. The vibrant, quick-witted woman who had organized his chaotic schedule and occasionally made him laugh despite himself was now a gaunt figure, drowning in white hospital linens, her once lustrous brown hair reduced to sparse wisps. "Do you need a moment, sir?" Dr. Lawson asked. Robert straightened his shoulders. No, we've wasted enough time already. When they entered the room, Sarah's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Equipment beeped softly, monitoring what remained of her life force. At the sound of their entrance, her eyelids fluttered open, focusing first on Emily. "My baby," she whispered, a smile transforming her ravaged face. "You came back." Emily rushed to her mother's bedside, clutching her drawing. "Look, Mommy, I drew us at the beach, like you promised for this summer." Sarah's thin hand reached out to touch the colorful crayon image. "It's beautiful, Emmy." Her gaze shifted, finding Robert standing awkwardly by the door, and the smile faded into shock. "Robert, you're actually here?" The use of his first name, something she'd never done during their professional relationship, emphasized how much had changed. He moved closer to the bed, feeling like an intruder in this sacred space between mother and daughter. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "Emily found me. She's quite resourceful." A tear slipped down Sarah's hollow cheek. "I was going to tell you. Today, actually. I had a letter prepared." Her voice, barely a whisper, cracked with emotion. "I never wanted to keep her from you. It just became harder to explain the longer I waited." Robert glanced at Thomas, who stood silently in the corner, then back to Sarah. "I understand, and I'm here now." Emily, perceptive despite her young age, looked between them. "Mommy, I bought Daddy for an hour with my savings, and Mrs. Jenkins, Bunny, he's coming to the beach with us when you get better." The innocent statement hung in the air like a fragile soap bubble. Sarah's eyes met Robert's, a lifetime of unspoken words passing between them. "Emmy, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "can you show the nice nurse your other drawings? Mommy needs to talk to your daddy for a minute." Once Emily had been guided to a small table in the corner of the room, Sarah turned back to Robert, her expression urgent despite her weakness. "I didn't name you in the will to trap you," she whispered. "I just couldn't bear the thought of her in the system. If you don't want her, my sister in Chicago—" "Stop," Robert interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat, leaning in. "Emily is my daughter. I'll take care of her." Sarah studied his face with the intensity she'd once used when determining if he was actually listening to his scheduled briefings. "You don't know the first thing about raising a child, Robert. Your life isn't set up for it." "Then I'll change my life," he replied simply. A shadow of the old Sarah, sharp, skeptical, flashed in her eyes. "Just like that? The man who cancelled a date with me because acquisition papers came in 15 minutes before we were supposed to leave?" The memory struck him like a physical blow. He had taken her to dinner once, 5 years and a lifetime ago, a rare moment of weakness that had led to a single night together. A night he'd promptly compartmentalized and forgotten in the rush of the biggest deal of his career. Before he could respond, Sarah's expression softened. "I'm sorry, that's not fair, you didn't know." Her breathing became more labored. "But you need to understand something. Emily believes in fairy tales. She thinks her daddy is going to swoop in and make everything better. If you're going to be in her life, you can't be the father who checks in when it's convenient. She deserves better than that." Robert reached out, hesitantly taking Sarah's frail hand in his. "I promise you, Sarah, I'll be the father she needs." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Robert. Not to her." As if summoned by her mother's distress, Emily returned to the bedside, climbing carefully onto the edge of the bed. Sarah's face transformed again, love pushing past the pain. "Mommy, don't cry," Emily said, patting her mother's cheek with her small hand. "Daddy's here now. Everything will be okay." Sarah pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Over the child's head, her eyes found Robert's again, filled with a fierce, desperate plea. Dr. Lawson appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Ms. Wilson, it's time for your medication." As the doctor approached with a syringe, Sarah kept her gaze locked with Robert's, mouthing words only he could see. "Prove me wrong." The next 36 hours passed in a blur for Robert. He cancelled meetings, delegated urgent matters to Thomas, and remained at the hospital, watching the tenuous thread of Sarah's life grow ever thinner. Emily stayed too, sleeping on a cot the nurses brought in. drawing pictures of impossibly happy futures, stick figures of 3 people holding hands on sunny beaches, standing before massive Christmas trees, riding roller coasters together. Each crayon bright image was like a knife to Robert's heart, windows into the childhood fantasies he'd never known she harbored. Fantasies of a complete family, of a father who had been there all along. She's been drawing these for years, Sarah told him during a rare moment of lucidity, the aggressive pain medications having temporarily cleared her mind. I told her, you were a very important businessman saving the world through your work. Robert winced. You made me sound much better than I am. Sarah's laugh turned into a painful cough. What was I supposed to say? Your daddy doesn't know you exist because I was too proud and he was too self-absorbed. Her expression softened. Children need heroes, Robert. I gave her one, even if it was a fiction. In the corridor outside, Robert had encountered Dr. Lawson again. We're making her comfortable. But her organs are shutting down, the doctor explained gently. It's time to say goodbyes. Now, as dawn broke on the second day, Robert sat beside Sarah's bed, while Emily still slept on the cot. Sarah's breathing had become more labored overnight. Her periods of consciousness briefer and more confused. Robert, she whispered, her eyes fluttering open, startling him from his thoughts. You're still here. He leaned closer. I told you I would be. Her cracked lips formed a weak smile. First, time for everything. She gestured weakly for water, and he held the straw to her lips. Emily has a routine, her school, her stuffed elephant she can't sleep without. Mrs. Jenkins helps, but she's getting too old for childcare. Sarah, Robert interrupted gently. So we can talk about this later when you're stronger. She shook her head, a flash of the old determination in her eyes. No more later for me. Listen, Emily needs stability, not nannies and boarding schools, not your 60-floor tower with no other children. She needs a home. Robert wanted to protest, to tell her she would recover, that they would have time to figure this out together, but the lie died on his lips. Instead, he said, I don't know how to be a father, Sarah. Nobody does at first, she replied, her voice fading. You learn. You show up. You put someone else first. Her fingers tightened weakly around his. There's a letter in my apartment, in my nightstand. Instructions, Emily's schedule, her favorite foods, the names of her stuffed animals. A tear slipped down her hollow cheek. I've been writing it for months, adding to it every time I remembered something important about her. The reality of what was happening, that Sarah had been preparing for her death, preparing to entrust their daughter to a man who hadn't known of her existence until 2 days ago, struck Robert with crushing force. I'll find it, he promised. I'll follow it to the letter. Sarah's eyes drifted to where Emily slept. She likes her sandwiches cut in triangles, not squares. She's afraid of the dark, needs the blue nightlight. Her favorite story is about the princess who saves herself. Her words were becoming more urgent, as if she were trying to download 5 years of motherhood into these final moments. She's allergic to strawberries, not deathly, but she gets hives. She needs someone to check her homework. She rushes through math because she finds it boring even though she's good at it. Sarah, Robert said, his throat tight, I'll take care of her. I swear it. She nodded slightly, her eyelids growing heavy. One more thing, she murmured. The most important. She beckoned him closer until his ear was near her lips. Love her more than your empire. If you can't do that, let my sister take her. Before Robert could respond, Emily stirred on her cot, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. Mommy? Daddy? She called sleepily. Sarah's face transformed, love pushing past, the pain one final time. Come here, my sweet girl. Emily padded over and carefully climbed onto the bed, nestling against her mother's side. Sarah's arm wrapped around her with surprising strength. Emily, she whispered, Mommy needs to tell you something very important. Robert started to stand, to give them privacy, but Sarah's gaze held him in place. Sometimes, Sarah continued, stroking Emily's hair, people we love have to go away for a while, but that doesn't mean they stop loving us. Emily looked up, her small face solemn. Is this about heaven? Mrs. Jenkins told me about heaven. Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. Yes, baby. Mommy has to go to heaven soon, but I'll always watch over you. And your daddy, Her eyes flicked to Robert. "Your daddy is going to take care of you now." Emily's lower lip trembled. "But you promised we'd go to the beach this summer." "I know, sweetheart." Sarah's voice broke. "Daddy will have to take you for me." Robert felt his own eyes burning as he watched this exchange, this impossible goodbye that no 5-year-old should have to endure. He moved closer, placing his hand on Emily's small shoulder. "We'll go to any beach you want," he promised softly. "And we'll build the biggest sandcastle in your mommy's honor." Emily looked up at him, his eyes swimming with tears. "Pinky promise?" Robert hooked his little finger with hers, the childish gesture feeling strangely solemn. "Pinky promise." Sarah watched this exchange, something like peace settling over her features. "Robert," she whispered, "the photo album in my bedside drawer, make sure she remembers." A nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression gentle but urgent. "Ms. Wilson's stats are dropping. We need to adjust her medication." As the medical team entered, Robert gently lifted Emily from the bed. She struggled against him, reaching for her mother. "No, I want to stay with Mommy." "Emmy," Sarah called, her voice surprisingly strong for a moment. "Be good for your daddy. Remember that Mommy loves you to the moon and back, forever and always." "And I love you to the stars and beyond, forever and ever," Emily replied, their practiced exchange bringing fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. The monitors beside the bed began to beep more insistently. Dr. Lawson entered, taking in the situation with a glance. "Mr. Kincaid," he said quietly, "you might want to take Emily to get some breakfast." Robert understood what wasn't being said. He held Emily closer as she continued to reach for her mother. "We'll be back very soon," he promised, not knowing if it was a lie. Sarah's eyes found his one last time as he carried their daughter from the room. In that gaze was everything unsaid between them: regret, forgiveness, and a final, desperate plea to protect the one perfect thing they had created together. As the door closed behind them, Emily buried her face against Robert's neck, her small body shaking with sobs. In that moment, Robert Kincaid, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, felt utterly helpless in the face of his daughter's grief. And somewhere deep inside, past the walls he'd built around his heart, something long dormant began to crack open. The call came 3 hours later. Robert and Emily had been in the hospital cafeteria, Emily picking listlessly at a plate of pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, when Robert's phone vibrated. One look at Dr. Lawson's name on the screen told him everything. "I need to take this," he said gently to Emily. "Stay right here where I can see you, okay?" She nodded, pushing the syrup around her plate with a fork. Robert stepped just far enough away to speak privately. "Mr. Kincaid," Dr. Lawson's voice was soft with practiced compassion, "I'm very sorry. Ms. Wilson passed peacefully about 10 minutes ago." Though he had been expecting it, the finality still struck Robert like a physical blow. Sarah was gone. The mother of his child, a woman he had barely known despite their profound connection, was gone forever. "Thank you, Doctor," he managed to say, "for everything you did for her." "She was a remarkable woman," Dr. Lawson replied. "In her final moments, she asked me to remind you about a letter." "I'll find it," Robert assured him, his gaze fixed on Emily, who was now carefully arranging her fruit into a smiley face, unaware that her world had just irrevocably changed. After hanging up, Robert stood frozen, the noise of the cafeteria fading to a distant hum. How did one tell a 5-year-old that her mother was never coming back? His own mother had died when he was 12, old enough to understand death, young enough for it to destroy his sense of security forever. His father had delivered the news with stiff-lipped stoicism, then retreated into work, leaving Robert to navigate his grief alone. He would not do that to Emily. Robert returned to the table and sat beside her, rather than across. "Emily," he began, his voice gentle. She looked up at him, and he saw in her eyes that she already knew. Children often did, he realized. They sensed the seismic shifts adults tried to cushion. "Mommy went to heaven, didn't she?" Emily asked quietly. Robert nodded, unable to trust his voice. Emily's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper heart, holding it out to him. "Mommy helped me make this last week. She said when she went to heaven I should give it to you." Robert unfolded the paper heart with trembling fingers. Inside, in Sarah's neat handwriting, were the words, "She needs you more than your company does." Something broke open inside Robert then, a dam he hadn't known existed, and for the first time since his own mother's funeral, tears filled his eyes. Emily watched him curiously. "Are you sad, Daddy?" "Yes," he admitted, not bothering to wipe away the tear that escaped. "I'm sad that your mommy is gone, and I'm sad that I didn't know her or you better." Emily considered this, then scooted her chair closer. "Mommy said you were saving the world with important business. That's why you couldn't visit." The child's acceptance of this fiction, this kind lie Sarah had told to protect both Emily and Robert's image, was more painful than any accusation could have been. "Emily," he said, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. I should have been part of your life from the beginning, and I wasn't. And I'm very, very sorry for that." She studied him with those piercing green eyes. "But you're here now. You kept our deal. The $100 she'd saved to buy an hour of his time, an hour that had stretched into days and would now stretch into a lifetime of responsibility." "Yes," he said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." After making arrangements at the hospital, Robert found himself facing another challenge, taking Emily to the only home she had ever known, to collect her belongings and find Sarah's letter. Sarah's apartment was in Cambridge, a modest two-bedroom in a well-maintained but decidedly middle-class building, the kind of place Robert hadn't set foot in for decades. Emily led the way up the stairs, fishing a key from a small pocket sewn inside her backpack. "Mommy said I should only use this in emergencies," she explained seriously as she struggled with the lock. "But I think this counts." The apartment was exactly what Robert would have expected from Sarah, practical, orderly, and warm. Bookshelves lined the living room walls, family photos covered the refrigerator, and Emily's artwork was displayed prominently on a dedicated corkboard. "My room is this way," Emily announced, leading him down a short hallway. "You can see my stuffed animals." Robert followed, noting the careful economy of the space. Sarah had clearly stretched every dollar to create a loving home. The contrast to his own palatial penthouse was stark and humbling. Emily's room was a splash of color, purple walls adorned with glow-in-the-dark stars, a small bed with a handmade quilt, and shelves crowded with books and toys. A collection of stuffed animals held court on her bed, arranged with obvious care. "This is Ellie," Emily said, picking up a well-loved elephant with one ear slightly more worn than the other. "She helps me sleep." She introduced each stuffed animal with solemn ceremony, and Robert paid close attention, knowing these details mattered. "Emily," he said gently when she'd finished, "I need to look for something in your mother's room. Will you be okay playing here for a few minutes?" She nodded, already settling into what looked like a familiar game with her stuffed companions. Robert made his way to Sarah's bedroom, feeling like an intruder in this private space. Sarah's room was as practical as the rest of the apartment, with one notable exception. The wall above her bed was covered with photos of Emily as a newborn taking her first steps, on her first day of preschool, blowing out birthday candles. A visual chronicle of all the moments Robert had missed. He sat heavily on the edge of her bed, the weight of his absence crashing down on him. 5 years of Emily's life, gone. Moments he would never experience, milestones he would never witness, remembering. His purpose, Robert opened the bedside drawer. Inside he found a thick envelope with his name written on it in Sarah's handwriting, and beside it, a worn leather photo album. The letter was pages long, written in Sarah's neat, efficient script. It began simply, "Robert, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've accepted responsibility for our daughter. First, thank you. Second, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Pride is a terrible reason to keep a father from his child, but fear is even worse. I was afraid you would either reject her entirely or try to take her from me. Neither seemed bearable." Robert read on, tears blurring his vision as Sarah detailed Emily's routine, her preferences, her fears and joys. The letter was comprehensive, a Mother's attempt to transfer 5 years of intimate knowledge to a father who had been absent. It was also deeply personal, with Sarah's voice coming through clearly. She's stubborn, like both of us. When she sets her mind on something, prepare for battle, but choose those battles wisely. She needs firm boundaries delivered with kindness. She responds to reason, not authority for authority's sake. Page after page of insights, culminating in a section that made Robert's hands shake. I don't know what kind of father you'll be, Robert. The man I knew 5 years ago was brilliant, driven, occasionally kind, but ultimately self-focused. You once told me that nothing would ever come before Kincaid Investments. I hope for Emily's sake that you've changed, or that she can help. You change, because here's the truth about parenthood. It will break you open if you let it. It will demand everything and return immeasurable joy. It's not a part-time commitment or something you can delegate. Emily doesn't need your money or your connections. She needs you, your time, your attention, your love. If you can give her those things, you'll discover what I did. That all the success in the world means nothing compared to the love of this one extraordinary child. She is the best of both of us, Robert. Don't let her grow up believing that business matters more than she does. Don't let her become collateral damage to ambition, the way we both did with our own fathers. The letter ended with a postscript that knocked the breath from Robert's lungs. P.S. Look in the photo album. There's something you should see. Robert set down the letter with shaking hands and reached for the album. The first pages were filled with photos of a pregnant Sarah, her face glowing despite her solitude. Then came Emily's birth, tiny and red-faced in the hospital, but it was the photo on the third page that stopped his heart. Sarah in a hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, holding newborn Emily, and beside the bed stood Thomas, Robert's closest friend and CFO, his expression a complex mixture of joy and sorrow. Thomas had been there for Emily's birth when Robert wasn't even aware of her existence. The realization was like ice water in his veins. He flipped through more pages, seeing Thomas appear in photos throughout Emily's life, at her first birthday party, teaching her to ride a tricycle, reading to her on a park bench, playing the role that should have been Robert's. The final photo was from what appeared to be Christmas morning just months ago. Emily was opening a present, her face alight with joy. Sarah sat nearby, noticeably thinner, her smile strained but genuine. And there was Thomas again, watching Emily with unmistakable affection. On the inside back cover of the album, Sarah had written, "He stepped up when you weren't there. Remember that before you judge either of us too harshly." Robert closed the album, his mind reeling. His oldest friend had kept this secret for years while becoming a surrogate father to Robert's daughter. The betrayal stung sharply, but beneath it lay a more uncomfortable truth. Thomas had done what Robert likely wouldn't have been capable of 5 years ago. "Daddy," Emily's voice came from the doorway. "Are you crying?" Robert looked up to find his daughter watching him. Ellie the elephant clutched to her chest. He didn't bother hiding the tears on his face. "Yes," he admitted. "Sometimes grown-ups cry too." Emily nodded solemnly, then crossed the room and climbed onto the bed beside him. With the innocent wisdom of children, she patted his hand. "Mommy said it's okay to be sad when your heart hurts. My heart hurts too." Robert gently put his arm around her small shoulders, this child who was simultaneously a stranger and the most important person in his world. "Mine too, Emily, but we'll help each other, okay?" She leaned against him, a gesture of trust he hadn't earned but desperately wanted to deserve. "Mommy said you have a really big house. Do you have room for Ellie and all my friends?" She gestured to her collection of stuffed animals. "I have room for all of them," Robert assured her, "and we'll make it feel like home, I promise." Emily considered this, then looked up at him with those searching green eyes. "But who will take care of me when you're saving the world with your business?" The question, so innocent yet so piercing, struck Robert to his core. In one sentence, his 5-year-old daughter had cut to the heart of the challenge before him. How to reconcile the all-consuming ambition that had defined his life with the needs of a child who had just lost her mother. Staring into Emily's trusting face, Robert Kincaid, who had built an empire through calculated risks and strategic sacrifices, made the first truly selfless decision of his adult life. "Emily," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to promise, "from now on, taking care of you is the most important business I have." The penthouse at Kincaid Tower had always felt like the perfect statement of Robert's success, minimalist, elegant, and utterly impersonal. Now, as he led Emily through the sleek living room, with its panoramic views of Boston Harbor, he saw it through new eyes, cold, unwelcoming, and completely unsuited for a child. "Where are all your things?" Emily asked, clutching Ellie the elephant, as she surveyed the stark white furniture and glass tables. "What do you mean?" Robert asked, setting down her small suitcase filled with clothes and the duffel bag containing her most treasured possessions. "Your pictures and books and toys," she explained as if it were obvious. "Mommy said homes need heart things, not just furniture things." Robert glanced around the space that had featured in architectural magazines, but had never felt like more than a place to sleep between workdays. "I guess I don't have many heart things," Emily nodded solemnly. "We can make some. I'm good at drawing." A lump formed in Robert's throat. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been a merger valuation. Now he was responsible for this small person who saw the world with such clarity. The first night was a disaster. Despite bringing Emily's familiar bedding and stuffed animals to the guest room, she couldn't sleep in the strange environment. Robert found her sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows at midnight, tears streaming down her face. "The stars are different here," she whispered when he knelt beside her. "Mommy and I had special stars we said goodnight to." Robert, exhausted from the emotional toll of the past days and facing an early meeting with international investors, felt a flash of frustration. But looking at Emily's tear-streaked face, he remembered Sarah's letter. "She needs you, your time, your attention." So instead of insisting she return to bed, he sat beside her on the floor. "Tell me about your special stars." Emily pointed to the sky, describing the constellation she and Sarah had invented. The elephant, inspired by Ellie. Robert couldn't see it, but he nodded along, letting her talk until her eyelids grew heavy. When she finally drifted off against his shoulder, he carried her to his own bed, where she curled up like a small comma and slept until morning. The following days brought a crash course in parenting that no business school could have prepared him for. The military precision with which Robert ran his company dissolved in the face of a 5-year-old's unpredictable needs. Meals became negotiations, bedtime an elaborate ritual, and the simple act of getting dressed for school a 30-minute production. On the 4th morning, Diane arrived at the penthouse as arranged, armed with a stack of documents requiring Robert's immediate attention before the board meeting. "The Shanghai investors are getting anxious," she reported, eyeing the chaos of the living room, now strewn with toys, drawings, and the remnants of a partially eaten breakfast. "And the Morgan acquisition team has requested a call at noon." Robert nodded distractedly, trying to coax Emily into her shoes while simultaneously reviewing quarterly projections. "I'll be there by 9. Have Thomas prep the Asia team." "No," Emily suddenly declared, throwing her shoe across the room. "I don't want to go to a new school. I want my old school with Miss Patterson and my friends." Diane's eyebrows rose slightly, unused to seeing her boss flustered by anyone, let alone someone who stood 3 feet tall. "Emily," Robert began, his patience fraying, "we talked about this. Your old school is too far from where we live now." "Then let's live where Mommy and I lived." Emily's lower lip trembled dangerously. "I hate it here. There's no place for Ellie's friends, and the bathroom is scary, and everything is white." Robert checked his watch. 8:15. The board would be assembling now, waiting for him to present the Asian expansion strategy he'd been championing for months. Diane cleared her throat. "Mr. Kincaid, the board—" "Tell them I'll be late," Robert interrupted, surprising both Diane and himself, "and reschedule the Morgan call." After Diane left, visibly bewildered, Robert sat on the floor beside his distraught daughter. "Emily, I know everything feels different and scary right now. I feel that way too sometimes." She looked up, surprised. "You do, but you're a grown-up." "Grown-ups get scared too," he admitted, "especially when things change suddenly." Emily considered this, absently stroking Ellie's worn ear. "Mommy said change is like getting a new book. It's confusing at first, but gets better when you learn the story." The simple wisdom caught Robert off guard. "Your mommy was very smart. She said I'm smart like her but stubborn like you," Emily replied. A ghost of a smile appearing, Robert laughed despite himself. She was right about that. He hesitated, then made an impulsive decision. "What if we don't go to school or work today? Instead, we could make this place feel more like home for you. Maybe find places for Ellie's friends, and add some color." Emily's eyes widened. "You'd miss your important meeting?" "Mommy said you never miss meetings." The words stung with truth. "I'm learning new priorities," he said simply. By the time Robert finally arrived at Kincaid Tower that afternoon, the board meeting had proceeded without him, an unprecedented absence that had set off speculation throughout the company. As he stepped off the elevator, Thomas was waiting, his expression inscrutable. "Conference room," his CFO said without preamble. "The board wants to speak with you, now." Robert straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn yesterday, another. "First, about the Asia strategy?" Thomas's gaze was steady. "About your future with the company." The conference room fell silent as Robert entered. 8 board members sat around the table where, just a week ago, a small girl had interrupted his carefully orchestrated life. Now those same executives regarded him with expressions ranging from concern to barely disguised opportunism. Victor Hargrove, the eldest board member and Robert's occasional mentor, spoke first. "Robert, we've been patient. We understood the emergency nature of the situation. But it's been 5 days, and Kincaid Investments can't operate with an absentee CEO." Robert took his customary seat at the head of the table. "I'm not absent. I've been in contact with all department heads daily." "Contact isn't leadership," countered Janet Meyer, head of the compensation committee. "The Shanghai team is threatening to walk if they don't get FaceTime with you. The Morgan acquisition is stalling. And now we hear you're bringing a child to the office?" Robert stiffened. News traveled fast. He had indeed brought Emily to Kincaid Tower that afternoon, setting her up in his private office with coloring books while he attended this meeting. "My daughter," he corrected, the word still new on his tongue, "needed to be with me today. Her nanny doesn't start until Monday." A ripple of murmurs circled the table. Victor leaned forward. "Robert, no one questions your dedication to this company. You built it from nothing. But this sudden domestic situation requires a solution that doesn't compromise what we've all worked to create." Robert felt a familiar anger rising. "A solution? My domestic situation, as you put it, is my 5-year-old daughter who just lost her mother. She's not a problem to be solved or delegated." "No one is suggesting that," Thomas interjected smoothly from his position at the other end of the table. "But there are practical considerations. Perhaps a leave of absence while you sort out arrangements." The suggestion hung in the air like a gauntlet. A leave of absence would effectively sideline Robert, potentially permanently. In the cutthroat world of investment banking, absence didn't make the heart grow fonder. It created a vacuum others rushed to fill. "That won't be necessary," Robert replied, his voice cooling to the temperature he reserved for hostile negotiations. "I've made arrangements that will allow me to fulfill both my responsibilities here and to my daughter." It was partly a bluff. The nanny he'd hired came highly recommended, but the woman had made it clear during the interview that she was an employee, not a surrogate parent. "Children need their parents present, Mr. Kincaid," she'd said firmly, "especially children experiencing loss." The board meeting ended in an uneasy truce, with Robert promising to be more visibly engaged in the Shanghai deal and to personally call the Morgan team that evening. As the board members filed out, Thomas lingered. "A moment, Robert." When they were alone, Thomas's professional mask slipped. "How is she, Emily?" The genuine concern in his voice reminded Robert of the photos in Sarah's album. Thomas at Emily's birthday parties, Thomas teaching her to ride a bike. "She's struggling," Robert admitted. "Everything is new and strange. She misses Sarah and her home." Thomas nodded. "The penthouse isn't exactly child-friendly. We're working on that." Robert hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in him since he'd seen those photos. "How long have you been part of her life, Thomas?" His CFO met his gaze steadily. "Since before she was born." I drove Sarah to the hospital when she went into labor. I was there when Emily took her first steps. Each word was like a blow. Yet, you never thought to tell me I had a daughter. I respected Sarah's wishes, Thomas replied. And frankly, I wasn't sure you were ready to be the father Emily deserved. His expression softened. Sarah made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure Emily was okay. I intend to keep that promise whether you approve or not. Before Robert could respond, his phone rang, Emily's new school. The principal's apologetic voice informed him that there had been an incident during recess, and could he come right away? 20 minutes later, Robert found Emily sitting defiantly in the principal's office, a boy with a tissue held to his bleeding nose seated across from her. She hit me for no reason, the boy protested as his mother fussed over him. That's not true. Emily's eyes flashed with a familiar fire. He said my daddy didn't want me, because if he did, he would have been there before Mommy died. Robert felt the words like a physical blow. He knelt before Emily, gently taking her small hands in his. Emily, we don't hit people, even when they say hurtful things. But he was wrong, she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. You do want me, don't you? The uncertainty in her voice broke something open inside him. Of course I do, he said fiercely. More than anything in the world. The principal, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Collins, suggested they continue the conversation in private. Once the other parent and child had left, she regarded Robert thoughtfully. Mr. Kincaid, Emily is going through an extremely difficult transition. New home, new school, loss of her mother, and a father she's just getting to know. She needs stability and reassurance. Robert nodded, feeling woefully inadequate. I'm doing my best. Dr. Collins smiled sympathetically. I'm sure you are, but children Emily's age need routine and consistent presence. Our parents' night is this Friday. It would be very beneficial for Emily if you could attend. Friday, the day of the critical Shanghai meeting he'd just recommitted to with the board, Robert felt the opposing forces of his life pulling him in different directions. I'll be there, he promised, hoping he could find a way to make it work. But Friday arrived with the predictable collision of commitments. The Shanghai meeting ran long, with complex negotiations that required Robert's direct involvement. By the time he glanced at his watch, parents' night was half over. He called the nanny, who reported that Emily had gotten dressed in her special outfit and had been waiting by the door for the past hour. She's quite upset, Mr. Kincaid, the nanny said quietly. She made you a special card for the occasion. Robert closed his eyes, the weight of his failure crushing down on him. Put her on the phone, please. Emily's small voice was subdued. Hi, Daddy. Emily, sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but this meeting is running much longer than I expected. I'm not going to make it to parents' night. A long silence followed. It's okay, she finally said, in a tone that made it clear it was anything but okay. Mommy sometimes had to work late too. The difference, Robert knew with sickening clarity, was that Sarah had probably missed events only rarely, in true emergencies, not as a matter of routine. I'll make it up to you, he promised. Tomorrow we'll do anything you want, all day. Okay, Emily said again, her voice small and distant. Good night, Daddy. After hanging up, Robert turned back to the conference room, where the Shanghai investors were waiting only to find Thomas blocking his path. Go, his CFO said firmly. What? Go to parents' night. I'll handle the rest of this meeting. Thomas's expression was unyielding. Emily needs you there more than these investors do. We've been working on this deal for months, Robert protested, even as he felt himself wavering. And we'll close it, Thomas assured him. But your daughter only gets one childhood, Robert. Don't miss it. The words echoed those in Sarah's letter. Robert hesitated just a moment longer, then nodded. Thank you, Thomas. He made it to the school with 15 minutes of the event remaining. Just enough time to see Emily's face transform with joy when she spotted him in the doorway, to admire the self-portrait she'd drawn for her classroom display, and to accept the slightly crumpled card she'd made him, with World's Best Daddy written in careful, hopeful letters. It was, Robert realized, as he watched Emily proudly introduce him to her teacher, the first time he'd ever walked away from a business deal. For a personal commitment, The world hadn't ended. The Shanghai investors would still be there tomorrow, and the look on his daughter's face was worth more than any acquisition. 2 weeks into fatherhood, Robert found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, leaving the office at 5:30 p.m. The faces of his employees registered various degrees of shock as he strode through the trading floor with his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, heading home to fulfill a promise to Emily about making homemade pizza. In the elevator, he found himself sharing the ride with Thomas, who raised an eyebrow at the early departure. "The Miller proposal," Thomas began. "Can wait until morning," Robert finished. "The analysts need time to complete their due diligence anyway." Thomas studied him with undisguised curiosity. "You've changed." The observation wasn't judgmental, merely factual, but it sparked something in Robert. As the elevator reached the lobby, he made an impulsive decision. "Join us for dinner," he said. "Emily's been asking about you." Thomas hesitated, surprise evident on his face. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No," Robert admitted, "but it's necessary. We have things to discuss." The penthouse had undergone a remarkable transformation in the past 2 weeks. Emily's artwork now adorned the once pristine walls. Cushions and throws in bright colors softened the minimalist furniture. Photographs, some from Sarah's apartment, others newly taken, lined the shelves. It looked, Robert realized with some surprise, like a home. Emily's delight at seeing Thomas was both heartwarming and painful for Robert to witness. She threw herself into his arms with the easy affection of a child greeting a beloved uncle, chattering about her new school and the friends she was making. Thomas listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed an intimate knowledge of Emily's likes and dislikes, knowledge Robert was still acquiring. During the messy but joyful process of making pizzas, Robert observed the easy rapport between them. Thomas knew exactly how Emily liked her pizza cut, in triangles, not squares, remembered her aversion to green peppers, and naturally fell into what was clearly a familiar routine of silly jokes and shared references. After Emily went to bed, clutching Ellie the elephant and extracting a promise from both men to check for monsters, a task Thomas performed with practiced efficiency, the two former friends sat in Robert's living room, the weight of unspoken words between them. "She adores you," Robert finally said, swirling the scotch in his glass. "More than she does me." Thomas sighed. "That's not a competition, Robert. She's known me her whole life. She's still getting to know you. Because you and Sarah decided I shouldn't be part of her life." The words came out sharper than intended. Thomas set down his glass with deliberate care. "Do you remember what you said to me the day before Sarah told me she was pregnant? We were celebrating the Westridge acquisition. You said, and I quote, 'This company is my only child and nothing will ever compete with it for my attention.'" Robert flinched, the memory surfacing with uncomfortable clarity. "Sarah heard you say that," Thomas continued. "She was bringing in the reports you'd asked for. That's why she never told you about the pregnancy. She believed you would either reject Emily entirely or try to control the situation in a way that suited your schedule, but not a child's needs. She was wrong," Robert protested, but the words lacked conviction. Thomas's gaze was steady. "Was she? Be honest, Robert. If Sarah had come to you 5 years ago and said she was pregnant with your child, what would you have done?" Robert wanted to insist he would have stepped up, embraced fatherhood, but the truth was more complicated. "I would have provided financially," he admitted. "Set up a trust fund, probably arranged for the best nannies and preschools. But would you have been present? Would you have changed diapers at 3 a.m., taken time off when she was sick, adjusted your schedule around her needs rather than expecting her life to conform to yours?" The questions hung in the air, uncomfortable in their accuracy. "I'm doing those things now," Robert said quietly. "Yes, you are," Thomas acknowledged, "and I'm genuinely impressed. But it took a tragedy to bring you here. Sarah knew the kind of man you were then. She made the best decision she could for Emily." Robert's anger flared. "It wasn't her decision to make alone. Emily is my daughter too. A biological fact you never would have known if Emily hadn't taken matters into her own hands," Thomas pointed out. "Sarah was dying, Robert. She had plenty of time to tell you, and she chose not to. That should tell you something." The brutal truth landed like a slap. Sarah had only named Robert as Emily's guardian because she had no better option, not because she believed he would be a good father. "Why you?" Robert asked, the question that had been burning inside him. "Why were you the one who was there? For all those moments I missed?" Thomas looked away, a complexity of emotions crossing his face. "I loved her," he said simply. "Not the way you did, briefly and conveniently, but deeply and completely. She didn't feel the same, but she allowed me to be part of Emily's life. It was enough." The revelation stunned Robert into silence. Thomas, controlled, practical Thomas, had harbored feelings for Sarah all these years, standing by her and Emily while keeping Robert's company running smoothly. "I didn't know," Robert finally said. "There's a lot you didn't know," Thomas replied, not unkindly. "You've built an empire, Robert, but you've missed so much life in the process." Before Robert could respond, a small voice came from the hallway. "Daddy? Uncle Thomas, I had a bad dream." Emily stood there in her pajamas, clutching Ellie, tears streaking her face. Both men rose simultaneously, then exchanged a glance. Thomas stepped back, deferring to Robert with a small nod. Robert crossed to his daughter and lifted her into his arms. "Want to tell me about it?" Emily buried her face against his shoulder. "Mommy was calling for me, but I couldn't find her," she whispered. "I looked everywhere." Robert's heart constricted. He carried Emily to the couch, sitting with her in his lap. Thomas quietly excused himself to make hot chocolate, apparently part of the established nightmare protocol. "I miss her so much," Emily said, her small body shaking with sobs. Why did she have to go away? It was the question Robert had been dreading, the one no logical explanation or corporate strategy could answer satisfactorily. He thought of the clinical explanations he could offer, about cancer and mortality rates, and knew they would mean nothing to a grieving child. Instead, he held her close and said the only true thing he knew. "I miss her too, sweetheart. Not in the same way you do, because you had so much more time with her. But I wish she was here too, especially for you." Emily looked up at him, her tear-stained face searching his. "Really? But you have your big company and your important meetings." "None of that matters as much as you," Robert said, surprising himself with how deeply he meant it. "Your mum made sure you had everything you needed, especially love. And now, that's my job. I'm not as good at it as she was, but I promise I'm trying to learn." Thomas returned with the hot chocolate, topped with the miniature marshmallows Emily loved. She accepted it with a watery smile, then asked in a small voice, "Can Uncle Thomas stay tonight? He knows how to keep the bad dreams away." The request stung, but Robert swallowed his pride. "If Uncle Thomas doesn't mind, that would be fine. Later," after Emily had finally fallen asleep between them on the couch during a Disney movie, Thomas spoke softly. "You're doing better than you think, Robert. She's starting to trust you." Robert looked down at his sleeping daughter, her hand now clutched in his rather than Thomas's. "I can't replace Sarah. I don't even know if I can be the father Emily deserves." "No one's asking you to replace Sarah," Thomas replied. "Emily doesn't need a perfect father. She just needs one who shows up, consistently, reliably, even when it's inconvenient or difficult." Robert met his friend's gaze over Emily's sleeping form. "I never thanked you," he said quietly, "for being there when I wasn't, for taking care of them both." Thomas nodded, acceptance of the belated gratitude in his eyes. "Sarah made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure Emily was all right. That includes making sure her father steps up." He paused. "The question is, are you willing to make the changes necessary to be the father she needs? Because, from where I stand, Kincaid Investment still seems to be your priority." The accusation was gentle but pointed. Before Robert could formulate a defense, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The Tokyo office, where it was already morning. Instinctively, he reached for it, then stopped himself as Emily stirred in her sleep. Thomas raised an eyebrow, his point made without words. Robert let the call go to voicemail, a small but significant choice. The message was clear. There would be many such moments in the years ahead, countless decisions between work and fatherhood, and the pattern of those choices would ultimately define what kind of father he would be. As if reading his thoughts, Thomas said quietly. It's not one big decision, Robert. It's 1,000 small ones every day. Looking down at Emily's peaceful face, Robert made a silent promise, not just to Sarah or to Emily, but to himself. Whatever it took, whatever he had to change or sacrifice, he would become the father this extraordinary child deserved. The Morgan acquisition was falling apart. Robert paced his office, phone pressed to his ear as he listened to the increasingly frantic reports from his team on the ground in New York. 6 months of work, millions in preparation, and a deal that would cement Kincaid Investments' position as an industry leader, all potentially lost because the Morgan family was having last-minute doubts. They're insisting on meeting with you personally, his lead negotiator explained. Today. They say if you can't make the time for this meeting, you're not serious about the partnership. Robert glanced at his watch. 2:15 p.m. Emily's school let. Out at 3. And he had promised to take her to the Children's Museum afterward, a trip postponed twice already due to work emergencies. Tell them I can do a video call at 4, he offered. They've explicitly rejected that option. It's in person or nothing, and their jet is waiting to leave for the Bahamas at 7 tonight. The negotiator's frustration was palpable. Robert, this is a $5 billion deal. Surely you can reschedule one afternoon with your daughter. The highway. Old Robert would have already been in a car to the airport. Family obligations were precisely the sort of personal matters he'd always insisted should be subordinated to business opportunities of this magnitude. Let me make some calls, he said finally. I'll get back to you in 15 minutes. His first call was to Thomas, who was in Chicago overseeing another project. The Morgans are forcing my hand, Robert explained after outlining the situation. If I don't get to New York today, we lose the deal. Thomas was silent for a moment. And if you break another promise to Emily, what do you lose there? The question hung between them unanswerable. That's not fair, Robert protested. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. $5 billion, Thomas. And Emily is a once-in-a-lifetime child who's already lost one parent, Thomas replied, evenly. Look, I can't tell you what to do, but remember what we discussed about patterns of choices. After hanging up, Robert made one more call, to Janet Chen, his VP of Strategy and the most capable executive on his team aside from Thomas. Janet, how quickly can you get to New York? 2 hours later, Robert sat cross-legged on the floor of the Children's Museum, helping Emily construct an elaborate contraption in the engineering exhibit. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Updates from Janet, questions from the legal team, messages from board members who'd heard rumors about his absence from the Morgan meeting. He ignored them all. Daddy, look, Emily exclaimed as their marble successfully navigated the twisting path they'd built together. Her face glowed with accomplishment and simple joy, an expression he was seeing more frequently as the weeks passed. Great job, Engineer Wilson, he replied, using the nickname that delighted her. Should we make it even more challenging, she nodded enthusiastically, already reaching for additional pieces. Robert felt his phone buzz again, a distinctive pattern indicating a call rather than a message. Janet, most likely, with news about the meeting. His fingers twitched toward his pocket, the instinct to answer ingrained by decades of putting business first. Emily glanced up, her expression faltering slightly as she recognized the familiar gesture. You can take your call, Daddy. I know it's important. The resignation in her voice, the practiced acceptance of coming second, hit Robert like a physical blow. How many times in her short life had she heard those words from Sarah? How quickly had she learned that important meant more important than you? Robert deliberately moved his hand away from his phone. Not as important as this, he said firmly. Not as important as you. The smile that bloomed across Emily's face was worth more than any acquisition. Later that evening, after Emily had fallen asleep surrounded by the drawings she'd made at the museum, Robert finally checked his messages. 27 missed calls, 42 texts, and 16 emails, all expressing various degrees of panic, outrage, or confusion about his absence from the Morgan meeting. The last message was from Janet, sent just 30 minutes earlier. Deal signed. Morgans responded well to your family emergency explanation and my presentation. They said any man who puts his daughter before a $5 billion deal has priorities they respect. Celebrations tomorrow? P.S. You owe me a very expensive dinner. Robert stared at the message, a complex tangle of emotions washing over him. Relief that the deal hadn't been lost, pride in Janet's capabilities, but mostly a profound sense that he had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. He moved quietly to Emily's bedroom doorway, watching her sleep, peacefully clutching Ellie the elephant. For the first time in his adult life, Robert had chosen something over business, and somehow, miraculously, both had worked out. But even if the deal had fallen through, he realized with startling clarity he would make the same choice again. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like freedom. His phone buzzed again. Thomas. I heard the news, his CFO said when Robert answered. Janet pulled off a miracle. She did, Robert agreed, and I think I just figured something out. What's that? Robert leaned against the doorframe, still watching Emily sleep. I've been approaching this all wrong. I've been trying to figure out how to fit Emily into my life, my schedule, my priorities, my world. But that's backward. I need to rebuild my life around her. Thomas was quiet for a moment. That's a significant shift for someone who has defined himself by his company for 20 years. It is, Robert acknowledged, which is why I need your help with something important, something that's going to shake up a lot of people, including the board. I'm listening, Thomas said. Robert outlined his plan, radical, unorthodox, but suddenly crystal clear in his mind. When he finished, Thomas let out a low whistle. You're serious about this? Completely, Robert confirmed. Emily deserves a father who's present, not just financially, but emotionally and physically. And I'm starting to think Kincaid Investments might actually be stronger for the changes I'm proposing. The board will fight you on this, Thomas warned. Victor, especially. Let them, Robert replied, with the confidence that had built his empire. I've never backed down from a fight worth having. As he ended the call, Robert felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. For years he had measured his worth by the growth of his company, the size of his deals, the influence he wielded in boardrooms. Now standing in the doorway watching his daughter sleep, he understood with perfect clarity that he had been using the wrong metrics all along. Success wasn't measured in billions of dollars or acquisitions completed. It was measured in promises kept, trust earned, and love given freely without expectation of return. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of convincing his board, his employees, and his investors that the changes he envisioned would strengthen rather than weaken the company he'd built. But tonight, watching Emily's peaceful breathing, Robert Kincaid, once defined solely by his ambition, recognized that he had already received the most valuable acquisition of his life, and he would do whatever it took to be worthy of her. The board meeting was set for 9 a.m. By 8:15, Robert had already dropped Emily at school, attending the morning assembly where she was receiving a certificate for her science project, a commitment he wouldn't have made, let alone kept, 2 months ago. Good luck with your big meeting, Daddy, she'd said, giving him an extra tight hug before running to join her friends. Remember, you're the boss. Her simple confidence bolstered him as he strode into Kincaid Tower, nodding to employees who still did double takes at his now regular arrivals at 8:30 rather than 6 a.m. and his departures at reasonable hours. The whispered speculations about his personal situation had evolved from crisis management theories to genuine curiosity about the changes in the once-driven CEO. Thomas was waiting in Robert's office, reviewing the presentation they'd prepared. Janet's on board, he reported. Simmons and Lopez too. That gives us 4 executive votes, including yours. We still need to convince at least 3 board members. Robert straightened his tie, one Emily had selected for him that morning, declaring, "It lucky because it matched his eyes. Victor's a definite no. Probably Peterson and Whitaker too, the old guard. We need Freeman, Thompson, and either Goldstein or Meyer." "Meyer's your best bet," Thomas advised. "She has grandchildren. She'll understand the motivation, if not the method." At precisely 9 a.m., Robert took his place at the head of the conference table, facing the assembled board members and his executive team. The familiar surge of adrenaline he'd always felt before major presentations was tempered now by a sense of purpose that transcended mere business strategy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for convening on short notice. What I'm about to propose represents a significant departure from how Kincaid Investments has operated for the past 20 years. It will require adjustments, flexibility, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom about corporate leadership." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Victor Hargrove's expression had already darkened to thundercloud proportions. "For 2 decades, I have operated under the belief that success required singular focus and personal sacrifice. I built this company by putting everything else, including family, second. I demanded the same commitment from all of you, and you delivered, creating one of the most successful investment firms in the country." Nods around the table, a sense of pride in their collective accomplishment. "But I've come to recognize that this model is fundamentally flawed and ultimately unsustainable. It produces short-term gains at the expense of long-term health, both for the individuals involved and, I believe, for the company itself." Victor could contain himself no longer. "Robert, if this is about your newfound parental responsibilities, perhaps we should discuss this privately, rather than hijacking a board meeting." Robert met his mentor's gaze steadily. "This isn't just about my daughter, Victor, though she has certainly catalyzed my thinking. This is about creating a more robust, sustainable company that values its people as whole human beings rather than interchangeable assets." He clicked to the first slide of his presentation. The Kincaid reorganization, building a company that works for families. For the next 30 minutes, Robert outlined his vision, a comprehensive restructuring of Kincaid Investments that would redistribute leadership responsibilities, create genuine work-life balance policies, and implement collaborative, decision-making processes that didn't rely on the constant physical presence of a single person. "I'm proposing to step back from day-to-day operations," he explained, coming to the most controversial aspect of his plan. "I'll remain CEO and retain strategic oversight, but Thomas will assume the role of Chief Operating Officer with expanded authority over daily functions. Janet Chen will be promoted to Executive Vice President, focusing on our growth markets." The room erupted in overlapping objections, with Victor's voice rising above the others. "This is corporate suicide. Our clients invest with us because of your personal involvement, Robert. The Kincaid in Kincaid Investments isn't just a name. It's a promise that you are personally overseeing their investments." Robert let the protests continue for a moment before raising his hand. "I understand your concerns. They're valid, and I've considered them carefully. But I believe we have an opportunity to pioneer a new model of corporate leadership, one that distributes responsibility more effectively, reduces burnout, and actually improves decision-making by incorporating diverse perspectives." Janet Chen, sleek and composed as always, spoke up. "The Morgan acquisition demonstrated that our team is fully capable of executing at the highest level, even without Robert's physical presence. In fact, I would argue that being forced to proceed without him strengthened our presentation and our negotiating position." Thomas nodded in agreement. "We've been operating in an unsustainable manner for years. 60-hour weeks, cancelled vacations, missed family milestones. These aren't badges of honor. They're symptoms of a dysfunctional system that ultimately leads to turnover, reduced creativity, and diminished long-term performance." Janet Meyer, the compensation committee head, whom Robert had hoped to sway, studied him thoughtfully. "This is quite a philosophical shift, Robert. What prompted it beyond your new parental status?" Robert considered the question, aware that his answer could determine the outcome of this battle. 2 months ago, a 5-year-old girl walked into this very room and asked to buy an hour of my time for $100, her entire savings. She valued that hour more than anything else she could have purchased. He paused, remembering Emily's determined face. "Since then, I've been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about how I've spent the past 20 years and what true value actually means." He clicked to the next slide, showing performance metrics. "But this isn't just philosophical. Look at our numbers since implementing some of these changes as a test case within my immediate team. Productivity is up. creative solutions have increased. The Morgan deal closed at better terms than our original projections. We're seeing tangible benefits from a more balanced approach. For the next hour, the debate raged, passionate, occasionally heated, but substantive. Robert answered each objection with data, examples, and the quiet confidence that had built his company in the first place. Gradually, he could see the tide turning. Not everyone was convinced, but enough heads were nodding to give him hope. Finally, Victor Hargrove leaned forward, his expression grave. "Robert, I've known you since you were a hungry young man with big dreams and a chip on your shoulder. I backed you when others thought you were too young, too aggressive, too unconventional. And I can't support this. It's a mistake. One that will cost this company dearly." The room fell silent, the weight of the senior board members' opposition hanging heavy in the air. "I respect your position, Victor," Robert replied evenly, "and I'm grateful for your mentorship over the years. But on this, we'll have to disagree. The question before us isn't whether Kincaid Investments will change. It's whether we'll lead that change or be forced into it when our best people burn out or leave for more balanced opportunities." Janet Meyer cleared her throat. "I'd like to propose a compromise, a 6-month trial period for these changes, with monthly board reviews and clear performance metrics. If the results don't meet agreed-upon benchmarks, we revert to the original structure." Heads nodded around the table. It was a reasonable middle ground, face-saving for all parties. "I can support that," Robert agreed. Victor scowled, but grudgingly nodded. 6 months, but I want weekly updates, not monthly." "Done," Robert said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Victor shook it, the gesture acknowledging that while the battle might be lost, the war wasn't over. As the meeting adjourned, Thomas fell into step beside Robert. "That went better than expected." "Meyer's compromise was brilliant," Robert acknowledged. "Gives everyone room to adjust without feeling cornered." "Speaking of adjustments," Thomas said, checking his watch, "if we're implementing this new balanced approach, shouldn't you be leaving soon?" "It's nearly 3. Robert smiled, the reminder bringing a lightness he was still getting used to. "Emily's school play is at 4, first-grade production of The Hungry Caterpillar. She's playing the butterfly." "Wouldn't miss it," Thomas replied, with a grin. "Janet and I are coming too, if that's all right." Emily invited the whole executive team. The thought of his top executives attending a children's play would have seemed absurd to Robert 3 months ago. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As he left Kincaid Tower that afternoon, his assistant handed him a small package that had been delivered earlier. Inside was a framed photo of Emily from her school picture day, her smile, radiant and genuine. She had written across the bottom in her careful first-grade handwriting, "For Daddy's desk, so you don't miss me too much at work." Robert placed the frame prominently on his desk, where it would be the first thing he saw each morning. A reminder of what truly mattered, of the legacy that couldn't be measured in dollars or deals. His phone buzzed with a message from the school. "Butterfly wings malfunction. Need glue and glitter emergency." Robert Kincaid, who once would have delegated such a trivial request to an assistant, grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator with a smile. There were crises in the corporate world, and then there were actual emergencies, like a 6-year-old butterfly with broken wings, and he was finally learning the difference. 1 year to the day since Emily had marched into his boardroom, Robert stood in the same space, now transformed. The cold minimalist design had given way to warmer tones, and photographs, mostly of Emily, adorned his once pristine walls. The corporate restructuring had not only survived its 6-month trial, but had become a case study in progressive leadership. Profits were up, employee retention had improved dramatically, and Kincaid Investments had been featured in the Wall Street Journal as a pioneer in work-life balance policies. Even Victor had grudgingly admitted the changes were working, though he still grumbled about coddling millennials. But today wasn't about business. Today was Father's Day. "Ready, Daddy?" Emily called, poking her head into his office. At 6, she had grown taller, her confidence blossoming under the steady love she now received. Gone was the hesitant child who'd once offered her savings to buy an hour of his time. "Ready," Robert confirmed, logging out of his computer. "Where's Uncle Thomas?" Waiting at the elevator with the picnic basket, the boardroom table had been pushed against the wall, making space for what had become a tradition, their Father's Day picnic overlooking the Boston skyline. It had been Emily's idea, to celebrate where their journey together had begun. As they spread the checkered blanket on the floor, Robert marveled at how completely his life had changed in just 12 months. His schedule now revolved around school events and bedtime stories as much as board meetings. He knew Emily's friends, her favorite foods, her fears and dreams. Thomas arrived with Janet Chen, now both godparents to Emily by Robert's formal request, a recognition of the family they had all become. "Special delivery," Thomas announced, presenting Emily with a small gift box. Inside was a silver frame containing the wrinkled $100 bill Emily had offered Robert that first day, preserved behind glass. Engraved along the bottom were the words, "The best investment ever made." Emily beamed, then turned serious. As she handed Robert her own gift, a handmade card with a child's drawing of two figures holding hands. "Open it, Daddy," she urged. Inside, in careful handwriting, "To the world's best daddy. Thank you for keeping your promise to Mommy." Robert felt his throat tighten. "What promise is that, sweetheart?" Emily's eyes, so like his own, met his directly. "To love me more than your empire. Mommy told me in a dream that you did it. You chose me." The room fell silent. Robert had never shared Sarah's final words with Emily. "When did you have this dream?" he asked softly. "Last night. Mommy said to tell you she was wrong." "That you proved her wrong just like she asked you to." Emily tilted her head. "What did she mean, Daddy?" Robert gathered his daughter into his arms, memories of Sarah's hospital room washing over him. Her final challenge? Prove me wrong. And he had. "It means," he explained, his voice thick with emotion, "that people can change when they love someone enough. Your mommy wasn't sure I could change, but I did, because of you." Emily nodded solemnly. "Mommy also said to tell you thank you for the beach." Last summer, Robert had kept his promise, taking Emily to the same seaside town where Sarah had once vacationed as a child. They'd built an enormous sandcastle and left a small frame with Sarah's photo beside it when the tide came in, Emily's idea of sending her mother a gift. Thomas cleared his throat, emotion evident in his eyes too. "To Sarah," he said, raising his lemonade glass, "who gave us both the greatest gift." "To Mommy," Emily echoed. As they enjoyed their picnic, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Sarah had once kept spotlessly clean as Robert's assistant. Robert reflected on the journey of the past year. He had lost an empire of isolation and gained a kingdom of connection. His company was thriving not despite his changed priorities, but because of them. Later, as Emily chatted with Janet about her upcoming dance recital, Thomas moved to stand beside Robert at the window. "You did it," his friend said quietly. "You proved her wrong." Robert nodded, watching his daughter's animated expression. "The strangest part is that I don't even remember who I was before. That man seems like a stranger now." "He was," Thomas replied simply. "But this version, the real Robert Kincaid, he's someone Sarah would have been proud to know." As the sun began to set over Boston, casting golden light across the boardroom where his life had changed forever, Robert Kincaid, once defined solely by the empire he'd built, understood with perfect clarity that his greatest legacy would never be measured in acquisitions or assets. It was sitting cross-legged on a picnic blanket in a corporate boardroom, wearing a paper crown she'd made herself, laughing with the kind of joy that no amount of money could ever buy, and it had only cost him $100 and everything he thought he wanted, a trade that had given him everything he truly needed.